Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring a really important topic,
Yeah, big one.
disaster management and preparedness. The source material that we're going to be diving into today is this book called Disaster Management and Preparedness.
Okay.
It's all about minimizing risks and damages from all sorts of disasters.
Yeah.
So we're going to be extracting the most important knowledge, really the core insights in the book to help you guys prepare
Yeah.
for various situations.
I mean, it's a vital topic. I think, most people don't think about it much at all
Right.
until it's too late. And as the book points out, the key to minimizing the impact of disasters is really in the planning and being prepared,
Yeah.
not just reacting after the fact.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So where do we begin?
Well, first off, I think it helps to kind of define, what do we mean by disaster,
Yeah.
And the book defines it as any event that causes significant damage and that disrupts human safety, health, and welfare.
Okay.
So it could be something we typically think of, like a natural disaster, or it could be something completely unexpected,
Okay.
something more along the lines of an emerging threat.
Gotcha. So let's talk about those natural disasters first. I think that's probably what most people think of
Right.
when they hear disaster. The book dives into some pretty harrowing historical examples, right?
Yeah.
Just to kind of really drive the point home.
Yeah, I mean, they don't mess around. Like, for instance, one that really stood out to me was the 1556 Shenxi earthquake in China,
Right.
which tragically killed an estimated 830,000 people.
Oh my gosh.
That event really underscores the sheer power, the destructive power of these natural forces.
830,000 people. That's just unimaginable.
Yeah.
And I remember, I think it was from this book that I read about the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire
Yeah.
in Kentucky back in 1977.
Oh, yeah. Classic example. I think it was over 160 people that died.
Yeah, over 160 people lost their lives.
Yeah. And what's fascinating about that one, aside from the tragedy, is that it spurred a wave of new, stricter fire regulations.
Right.
It's like a reminder that while disasters are awful, they can lead to positive changes.
Yeah.
That help prevent similar tragedies in the future.
It's like a wake-up call,
Yeah.
to reevaluate our safety measures.
Totally.
The book also mentions Hurricane Fran in 1996,
Oh, yeah. A costly one.
causing $5 billion in damages.
5 billion, I mean. It really shows that Mother Nature doesn't mess around.
Wow.
Yeah.
You might be surprised to learn, well, I was surprised to learn, that the book also highlights the 1925 tri-state tornado,
Yeah, that was a bad one.
which carved a path of destruction a mile wide.
I mean, can you imagine? A mile wide?
A mile wide. That's terrifying.
Yeah.
And it seems like, from reading the book, it seems like these natural disasters, these things, can really happen anywhere.
They can.
Yeah.
And that's why the book stresses the importance of, understanding the specific risks that your location faces. A tornado in the Midwest poses a very different threat than a hurricane on the coast.
Right. And it's not just natural disasters we need to be worried about, right?
Right.
The book also talks about these emerging risks,
Yes.
which sound a little more unsettling to me.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, though, when you think about it.
Right.
These are threats that might not have even been on our radar a generation ago,
Right.
but they become increasingly relevant in our rapidly changing world.
And so what kinds of things are we talking about when we say emerging risks?
Well, things like workplace terrorism, violence,
Okay.
bioterrorism, cyberterrorism,
All right.
It's a reflection of how interconnected our world has become and how those connections can actually create new vulnerabilities.
Yeah, it's almost like as technology advances,
Yeah.
so do the threats we face.
Right.
The book specifically calls out workplace violence, right?
Right. It does.
As one of these emerging threats.
Yes, absolutely. And the statistics are alarming, honestly.
Right.
Back in the 1980s, there were over 750 workplace killings annually, making it one of the leading causes of work-related deaths.
Wow.
And disturbingly, these incidents continue to happen.
Yeah, that's a sobering thought. I remember reading about the U.S. Postal Service
Oh, yeah.
recording hundreds of cases of violence.
Like 500, I think.
Yeah, against supervisors.
Yeah, supervisors.
So that's really scary.
Yeah.
That's a stark reminder that workplace violence isn't just a theoretical threat. It's a very real danger that organizations need to be prepared for.
Huh.
And that brings us to another important aspect
Yeah.
covered in the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is government regulations.
Oh, yeah. The legal side of things.
The legal side of things.
Mhm.
I'm guessing OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration,
OSHA.
takes
Yeah,
center stage here.
for sure. OSHA's the big one.
Right.
The book explains how OSHA plays this, critical role in setting safety standards, conducting inspections,
Okay.
and issuing penalties for violations.
Gotcha.
They're essentially like the watchdogs of workplace safety.
So it's not just a good idea to follow OSHA guidelines.
Yeah.
It's the law.
It's the law.
And that makes sense considering the potential consequences we just discussed.
Yeah. And beyond OSHA, the book also mentions other relevant regulations.
Right.
Like this thing called EPCRA.
EPCRA, what's that?
Which stands for the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act.
Okay.
It's all about transparency when it comes to hazardous materials
Okay.
in a community. So think of it this way. If there's a chemical plant in your town, EPCRA ensures that you have access to information about what materials they're using and the potential risks involved.
Okay.
So it's all about making sure communities have the knowledge they need to respond.
That sounds like essential information to have,
Oh, yeah.
especially in case of an accident.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about different types of disasters, natural disasters, those emerging from our changing world. We touched on the legal framework that's in place to kind of protect us.
Right.
But the real meat of the book, I think, and what you guys are probably most interested in,
Right.
is how to actually build a disaster preparedness strategy.
Yeah.
What are the steps involved?
Yeah. What are the key steps in crafting a solid plan?
Right. Well, the book breaks it down into this really clear and actionable plan.
Okay.
Okay. And it starts with a thorough risk and vulnerability analysis. You really need to understand, what threats does your organization face?
Okay.
Where are you most vulnerable? What are your kind of weaknesses? It's similar to a SWOT analysis, but with a focus on disaster preparedness.
Okay. So it's about identifying those potential problems before they even happen.
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds like a smart approach.
Absolutely. And once you have that clear picture, you can move on to developing specific procedures
Okay.
and outlining response plans for various scenarios. This is where things get really interesting
Yeah.
because it involves thinking through all the possible what-ifs and coming up with solutions beforehand.
And I imagine communication plays a crucial role
Oh, absolutely.
throughout this entire process.
Huge, huge. The book really emphasizes the importance of effective communication.
Yeah.
Both before, during, and after a disaster. It's about having clear internal communication channels.
Right.
So everyone in the organization knows what to do and who to contact.
So things like alarm systems.
Yeah, alarms.
Employee training,
Yeah.
well-marked evacuation routes.
Exactly. You want to make sure everyone's on the same page and they can act quickly and efficiently in an emergency. But it's not just about internal communication. The book also talks about the importance of managing external communication,
Right.
especially with the media,
Oh, yeah.
you know?
In today's world, especially.
Right, exactly. Information spreads like wildfire. You want to make sure that the public is getting accurate and timely updates,
Right.
not rumors or speculation. That's why having a designated spokesperson or public information officer is so important.
Someone who can stay calm and collected in the midst of chaos.
Exactly. Someone who can provide clear, factual information and help manage the narrative.
So it's a two-way street.
Right.
You're not just telling people what to do, you're also listening to their needs and concerns.
Precisely. And that's a critical part of building trust and ensuring that everyone feels heard and supported.
This is all incredibly insightful.
Yeah.
What about the people on the ground, though?
Yeah.
The ones who will be responding directly to a disaster.
Right.
How do we prepare them? How do we prepare those people?
Well, that's where training comes in. The book dedicates an entire chapter to this, highlighting the importance of providing your team with the knowledge and skills they need to respond effectively. It's not just about knowing what to do, it's about building confidence
Yeah.
and empowering them to take action.
And I imagine different people learn in different ways.
Oh, yeah.
So how do we make sure the training is effective for everyone?
Yeah, that's a great point. The book talks about tailoring training methods to different learning styles, which I thought was fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
Some people are visual learners, respond well to videos or diagrams. Others prefer a more hands-on, kinesthetic approach.
So a good training program would incorporate a variety of methods
Yeah.
to cater to everyone's needs.
It's about making the training engaging and memorable.
Right.
So that when faced with a real emergency, people can act instinctively and confidently.
Yeah.
And it's not just a one-time thing. The book stresses the importance of ongoing training and refresher courses to keep those skills sharp,
Right.
you know?
So we're constantly evaluating, adapting, and improving our procedures.
Totally. Disaster preparedness is an ongoing process. It's not a one-time event. You need to be constantly adapting and evolving your plans based on new information, changing circumstances, lessons learned.
It sounds like disaster preparedness is more than just creating a plan,
Yeah.
putting it on a shelf and forgetting about it.
Way more. It's a living document. It's something that should be reviewed and updated regularly.
That makes a lot of sense.
And it's not just about protecting lives and property.
Right.
It's also about protecting your organization's reputation and financial well-being.
Right. Because a disaster, especially if it's mishandled,
Oh, yeah.
could have a devastating impact on a company's image and bottom line.
Absolutely. It can really erode public trust,
Right.
impact your brand, hurt your bottom line. And the book emphasizes the importance of considering what they call the shareholder factor.
Yeah.
You know, investors want to know that their money is being put into a company that takes disaster preparedness seriously. It's all about mitigating risk and maintaining trust.
Yeah, it's like an insurance policy for your company's future.
It is. And speaking of insurance, that's another important aspect the book covers. It talks about the importance of having adequate insurance coverage.
Yeah, right. Of course.
To protect your organization in the event of a disaster, you know.
Right. Okay, so let's say the worst happens and disaster strikes.
Yeah.
What are the key steps to take in the aftermath
Yeah.
to minimize damage and expedite recovery?
Well, the book provides, practical guidance on everything from securing construction equipment and managing debris to navigating insurance claims and communicating with stakeholders. It's all about getting back on your feet as quickly and efficiently as possible.
And it sounds like having a plan in place can make a huge difference.
Oh, huge. Huge difference. The book emphasizes the importance of pre-planning for essential services like cranes or debris removal, to avoid inflated costs during a crisis.
That's smart thinking. Because in an emergency, everyone will be scrambling.
Everyone.
For those services. And demand will drive prices sky high.
Exactly. It's about being proactive, not reactive.
Yeah.
And equally important is communication with your employees and their families after a disaster.
Right, because in all the chaos, people will be worried about their loved ones, their jobs, their futures.
Exactly. That's where practical methods like having these predetermined phone trees or using radio announcements can be incredibly helpful.
So it's about having a system in place to keep everyone informed and connected.
Yeah.
But what about those who might need extra assistance during a disaster?
Yeah.
I'm thinking specifically about individuals with disabilities.
Yeah.
How do our plans address their needs?
That's an excellent point, and the book addresses it head-on. It emphasizes the importance of inclusivity in disaster preparedness, ensuring that everyone, regardless of ability, is considered and accommodated. It highlights the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, which requires equal access to services and programs, including emergency preparedness and response.
That makes sense. Everyone deserves to feel safe and supported.
Absolutely.
During a crisis.
And failing to address the needs of people with disabilities can lead to tragic consequences.
Right.
So we need to make sure that our plans are truly inclusive and that we're doing everything we can to protect everyone in our community.
This has been an incredibly informative dive into the world of disaster management and preparedness.
Yeah.
It's clear that this book is packed with practical advice and valuable insights. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I have one more question.
Okay.
What about the potential for personal legal ramifications?
Oh, yeah.
For safety professionals after a disaster,
Right.
particularly if fatalities are involved?
Yeah, that's a valid concern. And the book does address it.
Okay.
It highlights the fact that in some cases, particularly if there are fatalities involved, safety professionals could face legal action.
So it's not just the company that could be held liable, but individuals as well.
Yeah.
That's a lot of pressure.
It is. It is. And that's why the book emphasizes the need for legal counsel and a thorough understanding of your rights.
Right.
Especially during investigations.
This is like knowledge is power in those situations.
It really is. Being proactive about disaster preparedness can go a long way in protecting both your organization and yourself.
Well, this has been an incredibly thought-provoking discussion.
Yes.
We've covered a lot of ground.
A lot.
But there's still so much more to explore.
Yes, absolutely.
So we're going to move on to the next part of our deep dive shortly.
Sounds good.
But first, I want to take a moment to kind of reflect on what stood out to me the most from this book.
Okay.
What really struck me was this consistent message of proactivity. It's not just about reacting to disasters when they happen. It's about anticipating risks, planning meticulously,
Right.
and empowering your team to respond effectively.
I couldn't agree more. It's about shifting our mindset from reaction to prevention.
Exactly. And that shift in thinking can make all the difference. What about you? What resonated most with you?
Honestly, for me, the most important takeaway was the book's emphasis on the human element of disaster preparedness.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it's about recognizing that disasters don't just impact buildings and infrastructure, they impact people.
Right.
And those impacts can be profound and long-lasting, It's not just about physical safety.
Right.
It's about emotional well-being as well.
We often focus on the immediate aftermath of a disaster,
Yeah.
but the emotional toll can linger for years.
It can. And addressing that emotional toll is a critical part of the recovery process.
This has been a truly eye-opening conversation.
It has.
We've covered a lot of ground,
a lot of ground.
but there's still so much more to explore.
Yes, there is.
And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll delve deeper into the practicalities of building a robust disaster preparedness plan,
Yeah, looking forward to it.
drawing on, the insights from this book. Welcome back to our deep dive. We're continuing our exploration of disaster management and preparedness. And now we're really going to dig into the nitty-gritty of creating a solid plan.
Yeah, the rubber meets the road here.
Right.
The book provides this step-by-step approach.
Okay.
And it all starts with that risk and vulnerability analysis
Right.
we touched on earlier.
You mentioned it's like a SWOT analysis, but for disaster preparedness. Can you unpack that a bit more for us?
Sure. Think of it as this deep dive
Okay.
into your organization and its surroundings. You start by identifying potential hazards, and there might be more than you initially realize.
So it's not just about earthquakes and hurricanes.
Not at all.
Yeah.
You got to consider hazards specific to your industry and location. For example, if you're near a chemical plant, you need to consider the risk of a chemical spill. If you're in a politically volatile area, civil unrest might be a concern. It's all about being thorough and thinking through all the possibilities.
Okay, so we make a list of everything bad that could potentially happen.
Right.
What then?
Okay, so then comes the vulnerability assessment, and this is where things get really interesting. Imagine you're putting on your detective hat
Okay.
and looking for weak spots in your organization. Outdated equipment is an obvious one, but think about things like inadequate safety training or even a company culture where people are afraid to speak up about safety concerns.
So it's not just about physical vulnerabilities, it's about the human element too.
Exactly. This is where the analysis can really shine a light on those hidden cracks that could become major problems during a disaster.
And this whole process of analyzing risks and vulnerabilities, it can actually make organizations more proactive, right?
Absolutely. Because by identifying those potential problems before they even happen, you can take steps to fix them. And this analysis is the foundation of your entire disaster preparedness plan. It should inform every decision you make.
Okay.
From what supplies to stockpile to how you train your employees.
Speaking of training, we talked about that briefly before. What should an effective disaster preparedness training program look like? What are the key components?
Well, it needs to be tailored to the specific risks that you've identified in your vulnerability analysis. And it should address the needs of all your employees.
Yeah.
Remember, everyone learns differently, so
Yeah.
you can't just rely on a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
The book talks about incorporating these different learning styles: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. For visual learners, think videos and diagrams. For auditory learners, lectures and discussions might be more effective. And for kinesthetic learners, those hands-on simulations and drills are key.
And you mentioned site visits
Oh, yeah.
as part of the training. Can you give us an example of how that might work?
Yeah, let's say your evacuation plan involves moving everyone to this designated assembly point. A site visit to that location would allow employees to actually, familiarize themselves with the route, identify potential obstacles, and practice the evacuation process in a real-world setting. It brings the plan to life.
Yeah.
It makes it much more memorable.
So it's about making the training engaging, hands-on,
Yeah.
and relevant to people's everyday work lives.
Exactly. You want to make sure the training sticks. So when people are faced with a real emergency, they can act
Right.
quickly and confidently without having to think twice. And don't forget the importance of those regular refresher courses and after-action reviews, following drills or real-life incidents.
Right. So it's a continuous cycle of learning, evaluating, and improving.
Yes, exactly. You're never really done
Right.
with training. Disaster preparedness is this ongoing process. It's not a one-time event. You need to be constantly adapting and evolving your plans based on new information, changing circumstances, lessons learned.
We talked about the importance of communication before, and I think it's worth diving a bit deeper
Yeah.
into that. How can organizations ensure that their communication is effective, especially during a really, really chaotic situation?
Yeah, that's a crucial question. Think of communication as the nervous system of your disaster response.
Okay.
Okay. It needs to be reliable and redundant.
Redundant. What do you mean by that?
It means having multiple ways to get information out.
No.
Don't rely on just one system, like email or the internet.
Right.
Because what happens if those systems go down?
Right.
You need those backup options.
So think old school methods.
Yeah.
Like landlines, two-way radios, even designated runners.
Exactly. You want to create multiple pathways for information to flow.
Yeah.
So even if one channel is disrupted, you can still communicate effectively.
Okay.
And don't forget about predetermined meeting points. If cell service is out, having a designated spot where people can gather and get updates can be invaluable.
So it's like creating a web of communication, so even if one strand breaks, the whole network doesn't collapse.
That's a great analogy. And when it comes to internal communication, clarity is key. Make sure your messages are concise, easy to understand, and delivered in a way that everyone can access, regardless of their location or their role in the organization.
So no long, jargon-filled emails that leave people scratching their heads.
Exactly. And regular drills are essential. This allows you to test those communication channels in a safe environment, identify any weaknesses, and refine your procedures before a real emergency happens. Practice makes perfect.
Practice makes perfect.
It really does. And when it comes to external communication, controlling the narrative is crucial. In today's world of social media and 24-hour news cycles, misinformation can spread like wildfire. You need to get ahead of the story and make sure the public is getting accurate information from a reliable source.
So having that designated spokesperson
Yes.
is really important.
Super important. This person needs to be well-trained in handling media inquiries, delivering clear messages under pressure, and maintaining this calm, reassuring presence even in the midst of a crisis.
That sounds like a really high-pressure job.
It can be, but having a skilled spokesperson can make all the difference in managing public perception and ensuring that your organization's message is heard.
So we've talked about the importance of communication, both internally and externally. What about the aftermath of a disaster? What are some key things organizations should consider during the recovery phase?
The recovery phase is just as crucial as the preparation and response phases. It's about rebuilding, restoring, and learning from what happened. And one of the most important things to remember is that communication remains vital.
So keeping employees informed about their jobs, their benefits, the status of the recovery efforts.
Exactly. And it's not just about internal communication. Transparency with the public is crucial as well. Be upfront about the extent of the damage, the timeline for recovery, and any ongoing risks.
So that honesty and transparency really goes a long way in building trust.
Absolutely.
Reassuring people that things are under control.
It does. And another important aspect of that is documentation. Document everything. Damage assessments, insurance claims, cleanup efforts, employee communications.
So that really helps with both accountability and learning from the experience.
Exactly. It provides this clear record of what happened, what worked, what didn't, and what can be improved upon next time. Because unfortunately, there might be a next time. That's a reality we have to face. But with a well-crafted disaster preparedness plan, we can at least minimize the impact of those events and be better equipped to bounce back quickly and effectively.
We've talked a lot about the practical aspects of disaster preparedness, but before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to touch on a topic that I think is often overlooked.
Okay.
The psychological effects of disasters.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
We talk about the physical damage, the financial damage, but what about the people? What about the trauma?
The human toll.
The emotional toll.
It's huge. And while the book focuses primarily on physical and financial damage, It's important to remember that disasters also have this profound impact on people's mental and emotional well-being, you know? People experience trauma, loss, fear, anxiety. It can be incredibly difficult to cope with.
And it's something that individuals and organizations really need to be prepared to address.
They do?
So how can we do that? How can we better prepare to deal with the emotional side of disaster recovery?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that deserves, its own dedicated discussion. But for now, let's just say that recognizing the potential for psychological trauma is the first step.
Okay.
Acknowledging that this is a real issue that needs to be addressed. And then, it's about having resources in place to provide support, counseling, and even just a safe space for people to process their emotions.
Because sometimes just having someone to talk to can make all the difference.
It can. And organizations can play a vital role in fostering that culture of support and understanding, where people feel comfortable seeking help
Right.
when they need it.
So even in the face of disaster, there's this element of human connection and compassion that can help us heal and rebuild.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, to me, that's a powerful message of hope,
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll be exploring the often overlooked but incredibly important topic of inclusivity in disaster preparedness, focusing specifically on the needs of individuals with disabilities. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. As we wrap up our exploration of disaster management and preparedness, I'm really eager to discuss something the book brings up that I think is so important, and that's inclusivity in our disaster plans.
Yeah, it's a topic that I think often gets overlooked, but it's absolutely essential. Disasters affect everyone, but the impact isn't always equal. People with disabilities often face unique challenges, and if our plans don't consider those, we're not truly prepared as a community. So how can we make sure our disaster plans are truly inclusive? Where do we even begin?
Well, it starts with understanding the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA.
Right.
That's not just a suggestion, it's the law. And it requires equal access to services, programs, and opportunities, which absolutely includes emergency preparedness and response.
Okay, so the ADA lays the groundwork.
Yeah.
But practically speaking, what should we be thinking about when we're creating or revising our plans?
Think about accessibility in every single step.
No.
Are your evacuation routes usable for someone in a wheelchair? Do your shelters accommodate people with sensory sensitivities like those on the autism spectrum? How will you communicate with someone who's deaf or hard of hearing?
Yeah, it's like putting yourself in someone else's shoes and imagining how they would experience a disaster situation.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just the physical accessibility.
Okay.
Communication is crucial too. Do you have sign language interpreters available? Can you provide information in Braille or large print? Are your alert systems accessible to those who can't hear?
So it's about recognizing that information needs to be delivered in a way that everyone can understand and act on.
Right. And training is a huge piece of this puzzle, too. Your emergency response team needs to be well-versed in disability awareness and sensitivity. They should know how to assist people with different needs in a safe and respectful way.
It's not just about knowing the procedures, it's about understanding the challenges and having the right communication skills.
Absolutely. And here's something I think is really important. Involve people with disabilities in the planning process itself.
Oh, that's a great idea.
They're the experts on their own needs, and their insights are invaluable.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. It's about collaboration and making sure everyone has a voice at the table.
Exactly. When you involve the community in this way, you not only create a better plan, but you also build trust and empower everyone to take ownership of their own safety.
This has been incredible. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive. We've talked about different types of disasters, creating a plan, communicating effectively, training our teams, making sure our plans are inclusive. What's the one big takeaway you hope our listeners walk away with today?
I think for me, it boils down to this. Disaster preparedness is not a one-and-done task. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
You're constantly evaluating risks, refining procedures, working with your entire community to build resilience.
So it's about being proactive, not reactive, and fostering a culture of preparedness where everyone feels empowered.
Exactly. And remember, while we can't control when or where disaster strikes, we can control how prepared we are to face it.
That's a powerful message. A huge thank you to our expert for guiding us through this incredible deep dive, and to you, our listeners, for joining us. Remember, stay curious, stay informed, and stay prepared.